press record. Could use spaces.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This quantitative ongoing study focuses on variety and frequency of words in text from comparative perspective. This exploratory study aims to test the hypothesis regarding differences in lexicon of verbs and adjectives between two varieties of French. French from France and French from Quebec. The study analyzes French and Quebec journalistic texts written in French and recently published in major newspapers such as Le Monde, Le Figaro, François, Le Devoir, and La Presse. Quebec French is often perceived as being less rich than Standard French, and the feeling of linguistic insecurity remains very strong in French speakers in Quebec. Written Quebec French, especially in the text intended for publication, follows the model known as International French, which shows minimal signs of regional variation. These differences are mainly lexical. Syntax and grammar conform to standards shared by all French-speaking countries. Consequently, one would expect very few notable differences between French and Quebec texts. My previous studies on variation in French highlighted the choices of verbs that differ in oral narratives in French from France and French from Quebec. These differences concern movement verbs and psychological verbs. Another study I conducted on the use of adjectives in two types of narratives shows that French informants use significantly greater variety and quantity of adjectives compared to Quebec speakers. The linguistic means used in the text are more diversified in French corpus. I noted a greater number of different adjectives and a greater diversity and verbal forms and temporal adverbs. So at the exploratory stage of the study, the corpus consists of 90 newspaper articles covering current political and cultural topics. So I have 45 articles written in each variety of French. This number will be increased in the next step. It wasn't possible to choose a large number of articles on a single subject, so I opted for articles with common topics: post-COVID-19, major political and social events. The statistical analysis concerned the number of different words in the text, the number of different adjectives, and different verbs. The type token ratio formula is used in the study. There is no consensus regarding the delimitation of the category of adjectives, the criteria for adjectivity, or classification of adjectives. When talking about adjectives, I mainly consider their function rather than their forms, because only some of the adjectives constitute a class called adjectives. For the purposes of this study, I take a very inclusive stance. The main function of adjectives is to qualify nouns. There are qualifying adjectives, une robe noire, a black dress, relational adjectives which can be replaced by a complement of the noun, une décision gouvernementale, versus une décision du gouvernement, literally a decision of the government, and finally referential or third type adjective, for instance, une carte bleue, that means literally a blue card, that means credit card in France. Adjectives that are part of compound nouns, which designate institution, political parties, or newspapers, for instance, are excluded from the calculation. So we have La République Française, the French Republic, Le Parti Vert, the Green Party, etc. When analyzing verbs, I examine the number of different verbs and the most frequently used verbs, passive structures, participles, and gerunds, which contribute to syntactic and stylistic sophistication, and types of verbs, psychological verbs, which describe perception, such as to see, to look, and cognition, to think, to realize, to understand, and movement verbs, to go, to come. A long indexing work preceded the analysis. I manually annotated adjectives and verbal forms because of the French morphology. In French, verbal morphology is characterized by a very large number of temporal forms. Adjectives agree in both number and gender with the noun or pronoun they modify. Another reason is homonymy. Some homonym forms can be verbs or noun, adverbs or adjectives. For instance, pouvoir means to be able, can, may, or pouvoir means also a power. Adjectives are not always as essential as verb or nouns. Qualifying adjectives appear where the speaker needs to express an inherent quality of the referent and selects one of the dimensions which constitute an essential characteristics. Results show that the corpus in French from France contains more adjectives, and the corpus in French from France contains 1.55 times more different adjectives than the corpus in French from Quebec. These results confirm other results of my previous study on the use of adjectives in oral narratives, which also shows that French informants from France use a greater number and variety of adjectives compared to Quebec speakers. Regarding the numbers of verbs and number of different verbs, I observe no differences between the two corpora. The same observation applies to passive structures. Verb of perception, such as to see, to look, to hear, and cognition, to think, to realize, to understand, are 2.5 times more frequent in French from France than in French from Quebec. While this not strictly concern the lexicon, I would like to mention the use of participles and gerunds in the corpora. Participles that are not part of compound tenses and do not function as adjectives, along with the gerunds, usually appear in written text, enhancing so stylistic complexity as illustrated in the example. Certains parents dépassent les limites en exposant leurs enfants à des applications de lecture. So now if you look at the numbers, the corpus in French from France contains 1.71 times more participles and gerunds compared to the corpus in French from Quebec. Once again, participles and gerunds contribute to the style of written text. And my conclusion. The results of the study confirm those observed in my previous studies on oral narratives in French from France and in French from Quebec. They highlighted differences in verbal morphology and the types of verbs. Verbs of perception and cognition are more frequent in French from France, and verbal morphology is considerably richer compared to Quebec corpus. There are no differences in the number of verbs or in the number of different verbs. While the type of the text imposes certain standard and is the same language, my results indicate that French texts from France exhibit greater lexical richness and sophistication. They contain more adjectives, a wider variety of adjectives, as well as more participles and gerunds compared to the French text from Quebec. And the next step, I will increase the size of the corpora to validate these results. Thank you.